Late 44 Hürtgen Forest. American units faced not only a brutal enemy, but also the unforgiving hostile land itself. The brutal rain-chilling fog and endless timber claimed more lives than a regiment's worth of artillery could count. Yet among all the chaos, reports began to surface of something not found in any official military history. Machine gun nests were found torn completely apart, their steel bent back, as if by the grip of some giant's hand. Survivors spoke of prints far larger than any man's pressed deeply and heavily into the wet, cold mud. Some swore they saw eyes burning in the dark, fixed upon the line like a great predator at watch. Entire squads simply vanished without a trace, their weapons left behind with twisted, broken barrels. The official reports blamed German firepower, but all of the chilling evidence told another story entirely. Whispers spread of a towering, upright figure that moved in the dark, defying all human explanation. The soldiers called it the Hürtgen Beast, a force of nature that history would officially refuse to acknowledge. Late 44 to Hürtgen Forest, where mud, rain, and timber proved just as lethal as the enemy, a brutal and unforgiving landscape. The mission secured road junctions to the Roer River, denying German forces any freedom of maneuver. Simple yet utterly vital. 7 corps units rotated in rifle companies under strength and tasked with an impossible defensive perimeter. It was a brutal test. Standard kit weighed heavy on their shoulders.
Damn.
When endurance failed, discipline alone carried the men and the burden. Their training was relentless. Bayonet pits and dry fire repetition, carving out the habits needed to survive the chaos. Non-commissioned officers maintained a quiet tempo. Sentries were posted watches, synchronized tasks completed. No spectacle. Engineers hardened the ground with wire obstacles, trip flares, and shallow mine belts designed to choke all points of entry. Machine gun crews cited M1919s for interlocking fields of fire, their range cards inked beneath red lens lamps in the darkness. Forward observers struggled in the canopy. The dense forest devoured their line of sight and twisted all artillery corrections. Medical stations rehearsed triage in mud and darkness. Morphine syrettes and carry teams drilled without a single pause. Communications relied on wire, but radios were a stopgap at best. The vast, dense forest lied to every single antenna. Cohesion grew in quiet moments, a shared ration, a traded dry sock, a tired joke passed through the line to relieve the tension. Foot discipline was a brutal necessity. One lame squad could break a defense. There was no room for any weakness. Sectors were memorized. Boundaries were made explicit. Ambiguity was a form of negligence, a silent mistake that could kill. Weather dictated the tempo. The cold stiffened, joints fog erased depth, and the constant rain transformed cover into pure weight. Weapons discipline equaled morale. Clean steel meant confidence beneath pressure, a small comfort in the overwhelming dread. Platoon plans layered fields of fire, final protective lines, encoded withdrawal signals, a complex web of survival. Logistics at foxhole scale mattered most. Round counts, dry socks, and a working lighter kept men in the fight. Hygiene prevented silent killers. Pit latrines and lime were used diligently to keep the ever-present infection at bay. Listening posts strained to decode the forest's language, a twig, under strain, a wind from the wrong direction, a terrible silence. The enemy was entrenched in competent MG-42s with merciless rates of fire mortars already zeroed in for a relentless assault. The emotional ledger was carried in letters never sent, in whispered prayers and in promises made to the damp, cold soil. Ammunition moved forward by handchain, each crate and each round bought one more crucial hour of defense against the enemy. Noise and light discipline drew the boundary between survival and exposure, between anonymity and a deadly spotlight. Sleep was rationed like ammunition, guarded by commanders as fiercely as any other precious and dwindling supply. Hot calories were as valuable as reinforcements. Routine meals maintained the illusion of order amidst the growing chaos. Objective codes replaced poetry. Men bled not for glory, but for Junction Able, and then simply for Junction Baker. Discipline included movement push-ups beside foxholes to keep hands warm, to keep minds alert to stay in the fight. Hand signals replaced voices. Silence became their second language, a necessary form of communication in the dark. Men memorized trench networks like neighborhoods. They would never own the geography of their very survival. Command posts remained austere, designed to vanish quickly when forced, leaving nothing behind but the ghost of a command. Drills carved grooves into thought. When alarms sounded, the body reacted before the mind could even begin to question. Combat lifesavers rehearsed tourniquet drills 60 seconds to draw a crucial line between impending life and certain death. Security was layered wire flares, listening posts, and discipline. Yet the vast dark forest still felt entirely too big. They were not anonymous. They were unit names inked on range cards, arcs drawn by hand cohesion forged before first contact. Unease arrived not with storms, but in quiet. In silences that lingered too long, a feeling of creeping dread began to take hold. Listening posts reported broken twigs in the dark where no patrols had been. An unseen enemy was on the move. A flare arced skyward, briefly revealing silhouettes in the distance, shadows impossibly far taller than any man. An entire machine gun nest was found destroyed. There was no crater. A silent, brutal force had come and gone. Men studied the wreckage, steel bent and twisted back as if by the grip of an immense, unimaginable hand. Footprints appeared in the mud, each one a massive step, twice the length of a soldier's exhausted stride. The marks went deeper than a man could ever press, even under the full weight of a heavy combat kit. Rumors spread in low whispers, an enemy too large for description, a terrifying force that moved unseen. Discipline strained as sentries reported noises that command could not verify. The chain of trust was breaking. The forest itself spoke in echoes, the snap of a branch, then a long, unnatural silence that followed. At dusk, fog cloaked all approaches, amplifying every sound until it was a loud and palpable threat. Men fired at perceived movements. Only splintered trees were found. The targets never appeared. Mines began to fail. Radio traffic noted a missing patrol. Call signs went unanswered, replaced by a sudden rush of static. Forward observers logged impossible anomalies in their reports, then crossed them out, too afraid to admit what they saw. The official record reduced the entries to environmental interference. But soldiers knew the difference between wind and a heavy weight. But soldiers knew the difference between the wind's harmless size and the heavy, palpable weight of an unseen massive presence. The ground vibrated in brief pulses as if something massive shifted and moved below the very surface. Ammunition was expended recklessly, men firing into the darkness to settle nerves and quiet their growing fears. Arguments flared between weary veterans and terrified replacements over whether to hold fire in the chaos. Fatigue deepened in the cold, eyes hollowed out in the dark, and hands began to shake on rifle stocks. Rations went untouched, stomachs were tightened and twisted, not by hunger but by a suffocating dread. Letters half-written were abandoned ink, blurred by damp fingers that trembled in the oppressive night. One corporal swore he heard steady breathing beyond the wire, a slow, deep sound, steady and deliberate. Machine gunners slept with belts already loaded, their tired hands resting on the cold grips of their weapons. When the wind finally dropped, silence became suffocating, heavier than any artillery's shell fire could ever be. Some men claimed they saw shapes watching from the tree line, unmoving and silent in the pre-dawn light. Orders reminded them of discipline, but that discipline was already frayed at the very edges of their sanity. A flare pistol misfired in the dark, and a wave of pure panic rippled through the entire perimeter. The chain of command reasserted control, but trust had already been weakened. It was a unit in a fragile state. A replacement soldier deserted his post, later found trembling in a drainage ditch, his mind completely broken. The forest itself seemed hostile, roots, tripped branches clawed, and the thick, grasping mud pulled hard. Reports filtered back of distant screams carried on the wind sounds that were cut short and then gone. By nightfall, every single shadow was an enemy, and every single silence was a terrible waiting threat. Confidence ebbed away, cohesion gave way to suspicion and a growing terror among the men. The first cracks had opened in the unit, and a constant growing unease had become their new companion. The first squad lost all contact. Their voices were suddenly replaced by nothing but a cold, dead hiss of radio static. Search parties found only scattered helmets and a field phone cord violently torn away, a chilling display of brutal force. Steel gun shields were found twisted into impossible shapes as if struck by some invisible crushing force of pure power. An M19 machine gun lay completely shattered on the ground, its steel barrel bent into an impossible, horrifying curve. Men whispered of artillery, but no craters marked the ground where the destruction had mysteriously taken place. Discipline began to waver as the unexplained became a terrifying and undeniable reality that defied all reason. A survivor from the missing patrol stammered of something impossibly tall moving through the woods on two legs. He spoke of its eyes glowing a faint red before collapsing into a state of shock so deep he couldn't move. Command dismissed his frantic account, but the silent, terrified ranks of the men believed every single word. At dusk, the silent forest came alive with a new kind of noise that did not match any known animal. Branches cracked high above a sound beyond the reach of any man, signaling a different and terrible threat. Deep thuds reverberated in the soil as if footsteps carried an immense and utterly terrible weight with them. Machine gunners fired frantic tracers into the dark, only illuminating shattered bark, not a single enemy. Every flare that arced through the sky revealed more confusion, silhouettes shifting quickly between trees. Expenditure of ammunition soared beyond all regulation. Men were burning through it in a quiet, blind panic. Stockpiles dwindled and resupply parties hesitated to even enter the dark, waiting woods in the night. Arguments escalated into violence among the men, their frayed nerves finally snapping under the intense pressure. One private broke all discipline, firing his rifle wildly into the dark until he was forcefully restrained. Veterans muttered of earlier campaigns, none of them recalled anything remotely like what they were seeing. The forest swallowed commands. Orders shouted vanished into the oppressive dark fog and were never heard. Morale slid. The defensive line was no longer straight, but trembling under the immense weight of fear. Night patrols refused to advance beyond the sight of the wire, completely paralyzed by their own terror. The enemy was heard but never seen, sensed, but never confirmed a silent and dreadful waiting threat. A listening post reported heavy breathing beyond the wire, then abruptly, chillingly went silent. Only their rifles remained stacked neatly in the mud, with every single bayonet mysteriously snapped. Engineers discovered wire obstacles torn aside as if they were nothing more than light, weightless thread. Trip flares ignited without a cause, illuminating nothing but the ground in their ghostly false glow. Men fired into the bright glow of the flares, believing they were already completely and utterly overrun. Smoke and gunfire blinded them, causing them to fire wildly into their very own lines. Several friendly casualties resulted directly from the overwhelming confusion and fear that gripped them. Command issued stern warnings, but fear was a force that no longer obeyed any spoken orders. Every man scanned the treetops as much as the ground, searching desperately for the impossible. Some swore they heard laughter, deep and guttural, carried on the cruel waiting wind. The line of foxholes resembled more a graveyard than a defensive position against a real enemy. Letters home were no longer written. The paper lay sodden and blank, their thoughts too broken to write. Prayer circles formed quietly in the mud outside any official notice from their broken command. A chaplain confessed in a written note, "We fight something I cannot possibly name or describe." Shell fire from friendly batteries massed distant roars, sounds too low to be any form of artillery. Men huddled together, their rifles clutched, as talismans more than any real useful weapon. Every hour brought another horrifying report of a disappearance or a mutilated emplacement. Maps lost all meaning. The forest seemed to shift its very paths, altered in the darkness overnight. Discipline cracked, further eyes were wide, fingers trembling on every trigger that they held. The forest was no longer terrain, it had become a living, malevolent, and terrifying adversary. Fear unified them more than orders, binding the men together in a state of silent, shared dread. By night's end, the unit no longer prepared for combat, they prepared for nothing but survival. The attack came without any warning, a sudden thunder of branches breaking under the immense crushing weight of something. Trip flares burst to life, illuminating the tree line in a horrifying, sickly light that revealed far too much. Figures moved within the hazy light. They were far too large and far too swift to be any kind of man. Machine guns roared to life, their tracers tearing through the darkness, but they were futile against the enemy. The forest replied with an unnatural silence, broken only by the sound of rending steel. An entire sandbag nest was lifted and thrown aside like it was nothing more than driftwood. Gunners screamed as their heavy weapon was violently torn from its very mount by an unseen force. One survivor recalled only the terrible glow of eyes, bright, unblinking, and utterly inhuman. Rifles cracked in panicked volleys, wildly aimed at nothing but fleeting shadows and blinding firelight. The canopy above echoed with a guttural roar that shook the very earth itself to its core. Men froze, unable to distinguish a shouted command from their own terrified primal instinct. A forward platoon was completely obliterated in minutes, its calls for support cut short by death. Artillery was desperately summoned, but the coordinates blurred amidst the panicked confusion. Shells fell blindly from the sky, striking friend and foe alike in a terrible, deafening chaos. The fog thickened, cloaking the perimeter in a complete and utter blinding sense of chaos. Bayonets were fixed with trembling hands, not by any order, but by sheer animal desperation. Close quarters combat erupted against something unseen, something immensely powerful and large. Men swung entrenching tools and rifle butts at nothing but air and moving shadow. Reports describe weapons being torn from hands before they could even be fired in defense. Casualties mounted in the dark bodies, vanishing into the smoke before anyone could even count. An entire section's fire plan went utterly silent, its men completely erased from the net. Command radios filled with overlapping screams, followed by nothing but the cold, dead static. Survivors spoke of entire trees collapsing as if they were nothing more than a twig swatted aside. The perimeter shrank by the minute, foxholes abandoned in the heat of the fight. Medics dragged the wounded, but many were seized by the shadows before reaching cover. A lieutenant frantically ordered a fallback, his voice tragically drowned by a final roar. The defensive line dissolved into fragments, every man left to fight for himself. Disciplined, disintegrated completely drills gave way to a state of primal, unthinking terror. Some men fired until their barrels glowed red, then turned and fled into the dark woods. Others froze completely rooted in place, unable to even lift a weapon in their defense. A chaplain clutched his cross until he vanished suddenly in the blinding smoke. One corporal swore he saw a shape blot out the stars above in the dark canopy. Those who ran tripped on roots and wire consumed by the pursuing malevolent shadows. Those who stayed were silenced, one by one, their cries of fear cut brutally short. The company command post fell last, its map boards overturned in the blinding final fire. By dawn, the sector was unrecognizable, torn earth, crushed timber, and a terrible silence. Of 3 platoons, fewer than a dozen men staggered back to the friendly lines. Their accounts were fragmented and incoherent, yet completely consistent in one detail. They spoke of a bipedal form, a towering shape above both men and their machines. It had passed through their defenses not as a simple enemy, but as a pure, brutal force of nature. When morning finally broke, the forest stood in an unnatural stillness, a silence that felt far more terrifying than the battle. Foxholes lay completely collapsed, their outlines barely visible beneath the thick, churned mud. Nothing remained. Sandbags were found violently shredded, their contents scattered and dispersed across the ground like ash. Abandoned rifles jutted from the earth at odd broken angles, a chilling testament to the fight's sudden end. Bodies were few. Many men had simply vanished, erased from the roll of the living. They were gone. Survivors staggered back in small, silent groups, their hollow eyes carrying the weight of disbelief. They carried no cohesion, no pride, only the overwhelming, unmanageable weight of what they had seen. Medical teams found wounds that were entirely inconsistent with artillery or any small arms fire. Steel helmets were found torn open as if by claws, a horrifying detail that no one could explain. Tripod mounts lay bent backwards, their heavy metal warped beyond all recognition. Engineers examined the destruction, but found no blast signatures, no logical cause for the wreckage. Official reports reduced the anomalies to enemy action, though the physical evidence said otherwise. A chaplain's cross lay in the mud, its silver twisted and the chain broken in a terrible way. Letters from the fallen men fluttered in the ditches, their ink completely blurred by the rain. Canteens spilled into the trenches, their owners never to be recovered from the shadows. Stretcher teams moved in a heavy silence, their faces ashen from what they had found. Command tallied the terrible losses, 3 platoons cut down to a handful of broken fragments. The official ledger attributed all the deaths to MG-42 fire and the shelling of artillery. No mention was made of the roars, the unblinking eyes, or the impossible, terrifying strength. Survivors whispered the name the Hürtgen beast when officers finally turned away from them. Some refused food, their hands shaking too badly from the trauma to even hold utensils. Others simply stared into nothing, their lips moving in quiet, private, desperate prayers. Nightfall brought a renewed sense of terror, though no attack ever followed the first one. A soldier carved a small mark in his helmet, a reminder that he still somehow lived. Medics noted signs of hysteria, tremors, and a frightening mutism among the traumatized ranks. Veterans confessed they now feared the unnatural silence of the forest more than any gunfire. Yard by yard, the unit withdrew, abandoning a place they could not possibly explain. The forest closed behind them, swallowing every single trace of the night's horrific battle. Official history reduced the clash to a failed advance, a simple tactical blunder, nothing more. Yet those who endured carried memories etched far deeper and darker than any physical wound. Years later, survivors refused to speak openly of the terrible things they saw in the Hürtgen Forest. When pressed, voices faltered and eyes darted as if they were reliving that horrific night. Some described a deep silence, a stillness far more oppressive and heavier than any bombardment. Others recalled eyes burning red in the fog fixed upon them even long after their escape. One sergeant admitted he heard his own name whispered by something unseen, a chilling personal sound. Medical records simply marked their condition as combat fatigue, a clinical and convenient lie. Yet the debilitating symptoms persisted. Tremors, nightmares, and a deep aversion to wooded ground. Official histories devoted just a single line to the incident: heavy enemy fire, and nothing more. But fragments of classified memoranda told a very different, far more chilling story. An intelligence note referenced anomalous damage patterns inconsistent with ordnance. Another hinted at an unverified bipedal presence within that bloody contested sector. The terminology was clinical, but the implication was chillingly and terrifyingly clear. The codename Project Stargate Echo surfaced in highly redacted military files. It connected the unexplained battlefield events to a cryptic category marked as Alpha. No definitions were given, only cross-references to highly restricted, unreadable annexes. Rumors spread quietly among the intelligence clerks, but questions drew swift reprimands. Veterans avoided reunions, unwilling to face the ghosts of the Hürtgen Forest. Those who did attend drank heavily, their eyes fixed on tree lines that no one else saw. A chaplain's diary surfaced decades later, its final terrifying entry left completely unfinished. It ended with the ominous words, "It walks upright, yet it is not man." Archaeologists probing the forest found soil compacted deeper than any tank treads. No machinery had ever been officially recorded in that remote, cursed location. Hunters reported an eerie silence, as though the very birds refused to sing there. Local villagers still avoid certain clearings, calling them cursed ground and will not trespass. One elder claimed her father saw firelight and shadows taller than any trees that night. She spoke of the men who fled the war, but who never returned to their homes. Historians dismiss these frightening tales as folklore born from deep trauma. But the surviving bent steel and vanished bodies remain completely unexplained. To this day, the Hürtgen Forest keeps its terrible secrets beneath moss and rain. Among those who served there, their silence speaks far louder than any official report.